Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
I need to keep bottles of water on hand because the water always goes out.
officials of Robbins Village are calling for federal help to replace their outdated water supply system. We're live from the south suburb.
Putting the public at risk.
A month before Illinois lets go of cash bail, the law is undergoing big changes, the latest from Springfield.
How high will your property tax bill be? It depends on what neighborhood you're in. We break it down.
A look at the benefits and risks of an experimental Alzheimer's drug.
Where do breakthrough ideas and discoveries come from?
A new series from the University of Chicago highlights some individuals and ideas that have transformed our world.
If we would write a book, it would be like completely sci-fi. It would be like there's no way this could happen.
But it did. The big story of how these little miracles made it home from war-torn Ukraine.
As part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series, the mayor is calling for federal funding after multiple water main breaks this year. Residents want this addressed after having no water on Thanksgiving. We'll have that and much more. But first, I send it back to you.
Thanks, Joanna. And now to some of today's top stories. The fate of President Joe Biden's student loan debt relief plan will be decided by the Supreme Court. The High Court agreed to hear the case after an appellate court ruled against the forgiveness program. The case is set to go before the court in February, with a ruling most likely to come in June. Meanwhile, the president's plan to reduce student debt for up to $20,000 for millions of qualified borrowers remains in limbo for now.
The Illinois Supreme Court confirms its second black woman justice. Joy Cunningham is replacing former Justice Ann Burke, seen here helping Justice Cunningham put on her robes. Cunningham was an appellate court justice for the 1st District before she was appointed to fill Burke's vacancy. Justice Lisa Holder White became the first black woman to serve on the Illinois Supreme Court when she was sworn in this past July.
Encouraging signs for the Chicago Police Department. Recruitment is up. The department reports applications have increased about 20% since 2021. That's amid retirements and a staffing shortage. CPD has had more than 8,700 applicants this year compared with 7,200 last year. And as of late November, the department says it's hired more than 770 officers. CPD says its goal is to add 1,000 new hires by the end of the year. In-person exams are being given at the Harold Washington Library on Friday and all city colleges on Friday and Saturday. Anyone aged 21 to 39 is eligible and can register in person before the test.
Coming up in the program, keeping track of the changes to a controversial criminal justice law.
First, we're live in Robbins, where residents have been struggling with the suburb's water supply system. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The village of Robbins is one of the oldest African-American suburbs in Chicago, founded in 1917. And over Thanksgiving week, hundreds of residents there were left without water. Joanna Hernandez and producer Ocasio Hernandez spent time in the south suburb this week as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series for more on the village's water system concerns. And Joanna joins us now from the Robbins Town Hall, where unfortunately, Joanna, it looks like a chilly night tonight.
No, it is. My weather app says it is 29 degrees out here. It is a bitter day. And residents say when the weather is like this, they are prone for water main breaks. And sometimes they're just dealing with no water or just droplets of water.
It's so frustrating. I mean, even to take a shower, you know, to wash your body, you got to go to somebody else's house to use water to get in a shower. You know, that's our main thing. We have 6 people living here. It's hard.
Samantha Conrad moved into the suburb over the summer and says she had no idea she would have to store water.
Sometimes, and even in the summertime too, you know, and this is not what I was expecting to buy our first home.
Longtime resident Shelby says the village has been dealing with water issues for as long as she remembers. Her family moved to Robbins in the 60s and says she has memories of her parents storing water, boiling water, and going without water for days.
Seems like nobody's trying to resolve it. The mayor saying he reached out to people and they passed out water and everything, but it's ongoing. So like it's never going to end.
And it's hard to really live like this. We almost forget we use water every day.
Every day you use water, have to catch water, boil it before. I haven't actually cooked a meal. I think this morning I cooked me some bacon.
And the water's a little bit better now, you said?
It's a little better.
Since the beginning of the year, Mayor Darren Byron says Robbins has experienced 23 water main breaks. Raised in the neighborhood, Mayor Bryant says he is taking on the issue and pleading for federal funding to reconstruct the more than 60-year-old infrastructure.
When we're talking about infrastructure, which is millions of dollars, you need the state and federal help. You know, a town like Robbins, and not even Robbins, most of these suburban towns, unless you affluent, can really support an infrastructure project.
Robbins has a population of around 4,600. Back in 2021, the U.S. Environmental Protecting Agency conducted an inspection where it states the city of Chicago supplies the water to the village, but ultimately it's Robbins' responsibility to maintain the water system. In the report, the village was hit with a slew of violations.
I do want to go on the record for saying this, is that, you know, the EPA is our friend, not our enemy. You know, they just listed about 30 violations that we know. We don't go around saying we want a bad pumping station and we want a hose in our infrastructure. We haven't knowingly neglected our infrastructure. We just never had the money to repair it.
Chicago has filed a lawsuit against Robbins to pay up the $16 million owed to the city for past due water balances and late fees. On top of that, they owe Calumet City Plumbing $71,000 in water main repair work. Mayor Bryant says Congressman Bobby Rush is leading efforts to address the long-standing infrastructure issues.
It came down once upon a time to systemic racism, you know, which, you know, our social economic class wasn't privy to some of the resources or to the attention that some of these other affluent towns were getting. It's not a Democrat-Republican thing as they fight on Capitol Hill. We need help on the local level.
For residents on Cadville Avenue, storing water, buying cases of water bottles has become a daily routine. It's got so frustrating for some that they are taking other alternatives.
Thinking about just moving?
Yes, I am. Truly thinking about getting out of here.
Not that you really want to. I mean, this is your family.
No.
The thing that really bothers me that comes the beginning of the year, they're talking about increasing our water bill. We're not getting water now. How can you go up on our water bill?
The mayor and Congressman Bobby Rush are expected to have a sit-down with the EPA in about 2 weeks to discuss the future of these suburban neighborhoods and their water systems. And coming up, we speak with the mayor, Darren Byron, about his first year in office. But first, I send it back to you.
Joanna, thank you. And now to Paris and changes to a controversial criminal justice law. Paris.
Brandis, thanks very much. Illinois legislators met today for the last time in 2022. Their final actions include protecting unemployment benefits, tax credits to lure more electric vehicle companies, and updates to the law known as the Safety Act. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the rundown. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, I'm going to spend the bulk of my time here talking about that criminal justice overhaul, the Safety Act, because it is such a big deal. Come January, Illinois will become the first state in the nation where those arrested for crimes will not have the option of paying bail. Instead, whether someone stays in jail while they await trial will depend on a series of metrics, factors like the type of alleged crime.
Illinois on January 1, 2023 will make history, civil rights history. One that all of us can look back at with pride. I know I'll say that this is my version of the Voting Rights Act. This is my version of Obamacare. This is what I did in Springfield and changed the fortunes for thousands of working-class Illinoisans.
Now, the Safety Act actually passed as law 2 years ago, but the most controversial aspect of it, dealing with no cash bail, takes effect next year, technically. Illinois lawmakers spent all day debating and making changes to it. Republicans had been opposed to the Safety Act in the first place. They say that after 2 years of being accused of fear-mongering, today's actions show that they were right.
You're fear-mongering. Well, guess what? We're here today to address the stuff that we were accused of fear-mongering about. Because it's true.
And Amanda, what's going to be new under this plan from what it would have been otherwise?
Well, Paris, there's actually a lot, but Democrats and those who defend the Safety Act say that the main principles of what they were trying to accomplish are going to stay in place, and that, they say, is the most important thing.
We started to do the work to ensure that equal justice under law means exactly that. That you don't have somebody bond out because they have a wad of cash in their pocket or because they have enough money in their bank account while somebody else is in jail simply because they're poor.
But Republican Senator Jason Barackman says the changes made today aren't just minor tweaks, and he says Governor J.B. Pritzker should have to answer for that.
The actions of the sponsor in this legislation are no mere clarification. They are substantive changes that are being made because of the harm putting the public at risk as a result of the Safety Act in the first place. So, Governor, why'd you sign the law in the first place and put the public at risk?
Now, critics say that the changes made today are going to make things better in January because, again, of that proposal that the General Assembly has just forwarded to Governor J.B. Pritzker. Still, critics say the changes do not go far enough.
So all of the issues that we're concerned about are still there. Now, things have been improved. I'm not going to deny that. But they're still there. And we have a severe crime problem in this state.
Now, states' attorneys, by the way, about 60 of them are suing to stop this law from taking effect, still also have unresolved concerns, and a big one deals with the so-called detention net. The Safety Act spells out crimes that are non-probationable, and the new version does expand that list. But Champaign County State's Attorney Julia Wrights, she's also president of the statewide State's Attorneys Association, says that certain types of burglary are not on that list and should be.
The criminal justice world is full of grays. You know, you might have somebody who throws a brick through a window, and that's a criminal damage to property, but they have a manifesto on them or a list of names of people that might be at risk from that individual. We can't detain them based just on the offense of criminal damage to property. And so that's an example of a concern that we would have.
Prosecutors can also move to keep someone detained if they prove that a defendant is likely to purposely evade future court dates. The new measure does lower the burden for prosecutors in having to prove that flight risk. At the same time, the measure does ensure that the defendant isn't going to be punished for missing a court date unintentionally or, say, arriving late to the courthouse because their bus was tardy. Now, Paris, these changes that passed the Senate did have some votes to spare, but here in the House, it barely eked by. In fact, there was a tense moment while the last couple of votes that were needed to get this to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk got on board. Again, we talked about the criticisms, but I want to say that you have organizations, victims' rights groups, the Cook County Public Defender's Office, as well as the ACLU, that say that changes that were made today are going to make things in a good place for January, and that will make the criminal legal system more fair and equitable. Did just receive a statement from Governor J.B. Pritzker, who, by the way, is in Washington, D.C., is attending a state dinner for the president of France. But Pritzker saying that he is glad that the tenets of the cashless bail system are kept in place, really alluding to the fact that he seems like he is going to sign this measure into law. Back to you.
All right, and T-minus a month before it does take effect. Amanda, thanks very much. And now we go to Brandis and the story we've been following over the past year. Brandis.
Paris, Ukrainian citizens are bracing against the winter as targeted attacks from Russian missiles have depleted the country's power grid. When the war there first broke out 10 months ago, we brought you the story of a Highland Park family sent into a panic over the invasion because a Ukrainian surrogate was due to deliver their twins over the summer. Today, a happy ending to their struggle, despite the fighting that continues far away. At just 7 months old, these two cuties have already taken their parents for the ride of a lifetime.
It really doesn't compare to anything.
We first met Jeff, Lilac, and David when they were a family of 3. It was March, and they were expecting twins via surrogate in Ukraine. Russia had just invaded, and their surrogate needed to escape her war-torn country.
We're thankful that she was able to get out because with the war with Russia, we were hearing that, they didn't have supplies. What we're hearing on the news was really scary.
Because Ukraine is the second most popular country for surrogacy, many expectant parents were in the same situation, trying to rescue surrogates and even newborn babies from a war zone. Jeff and Lilac's surrogate, Victoria, fled to the Czech Republic just in time, because then the girls were due in July?
Right. So
had she carried them to term,
she wouldn't have been able to get out of the country.
She delivered the twins early, at just 27 weeks, in a country that doesn't acknowledge surrogacy. The complications began to stack up.
We were very concerned about their health. We were in a foreign country. There was a language barrier. There was a time zone difference. There were legal issues that basically, according to the laws in the Czech Republic, Jeff and I are not seen as the parents of the girls.
Ellie, with the dark hair, and Natanya, with no hair, spent 59 days in the neonatal intensive care unit in Prague.
They were able to breathe on their own. However, they did have them on oxygen just to make sure, for the sake of it. They were not able to eat on their own, so they had a digestive tube going down to their stomach. It turns out that both of our daughters have a hole in their heart between both of the atriums, both of the oxygenated blood chambers in the heart, which apparently is a great hole to have. It's a great location to have a hole in your heart. So we are very fortunate in that regard.
Doctors say they'll need regular monitoring to ensure those holes shrink as the girls grow. As if that weren't enough, the couple had to jump through hoops and work with the U.S. State Department to allow them to be legally recognized as the twins' parents.
We had a lot of technical issues, a lot of logistical issues to get the girls out of the country because the Czech Republic was still adjusting, and the U.S. Embassy, the State Department, and therefore the U.S. Embassy was still trying to figure out how to accommodate the needs of all these parents that are in the U.S. whose children have been transferred or are going to be born in Prague due to what's going on in Ukraine.
Through it all, these two are finally home and on the road to a healthy future. Lilac and Jeff see it as a completely different experience from when they brought their son David home via a different surrogate, also in Ukraine.
We thought a couple years ago with David that we entered the twilight zone by flying to a foreign country
during a pandemic.
During a pandemic when there was no vaccination yet. The testing was just starting, and we had to quarantine in a hotel as soon as we got off the plane.
Yeah, for 2 weeks.
And what happened with the twins and Ukraine and Russia and the surrogate fleeing to go to another country, 2 years ago was a vacation compared to this.
Despite it all, the couple believes they're lucky.
All you can think to yourself is, my God, are we blessed? Despite everything we've been through, it's nothing. We were very fortunate.
David has nicknamed his little sisters Nini and Yi. Mom and Dad call them their big little miracles. Lilac and the girls have been home for about 6 weeks now. She flew to Prague when they were just 53 days old, and she stayed there for about 5 months as the babies got stronger, enough to make that long flight home. Lilac refers to it as their first girls' trip. Up next, breaking down property tax disparities. Stay with us.
How do we find resources we had no idea about?
The community seems to want us to be in this space. there's plenty of potential to do that stuff and keep it within the neighborhood and keep it ours.
Open up that latest property tax installment, and what do you see? If you're a homeowner in certain portions of the city, you've seen your bill go up quite a bit, as much as 46% in some areas. A new study from the Cook County Treasurer's Office breaks the numbers down and explains why exactly that is, especially as Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi has sought to shift the burden away from residential owners and onto commercial properties. And joining us now with more is Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi. We should mention we invited a representative with the Cook County Treasurer's Office that authored this study to be a part of this conversation, but they declined our request late this afternoon. Assessor Kagi, we're glad you're here with us.
Happy to be here, Paris.
All right, so first of all, this study, it found that the overall tax levy, meaning the property taxes allocated to the city, CPS, Water Reclamation District, et cetera, went up in Cook County about 4%. What does that mean for the average homeowner?
Well, what it means is that our taxing bodies, which pay for our schools and our security, municipal services, parks, libraries, they continue to raise money, which affects everyone's property tax bills. And they went up, the Treasurer's report, so they went up a little bit over 4% in Cook County, but they went up a little bit more in Chicago, up about 7%. And this means that even if assessments were held in place, everyone's taxes would go up.
And let's look at the breakdown there in some of the areas of the city of Chicago that they went up the most. So the near west side, the northwest side, lakefront areas, but on the near west side, Latino neighborhoods. Why were these the neighborhoods that were hit the hardest?
I think the Treasurer's report, and by the way, I think the Treasurer should be saluted for publishing this data. They oftentimes didn't do it in the past. She identified several different factors. First of all, the rising levies that affect everyone. So they went up about 7% in Chicago, up to $7.6 billion. She talked about the effect of TIFs, which raise everyone's taxes by a little bit. And we found that they raised taxes by 11% on the average homeowner. And then she identified how shifting changes of burden and what's going on with housing prices have affected many communities. Now, there's been a lot of basically gentrification happening, especially in Latino neighborhoods.
Like Pilsen and
Pilsen, southwest side, northwest side as well, which explains why they might have more of a share of the burden.
And that's where it went up 46%, around the Pilsen area.
But what the Treasurer also called out was the fact that there were such giant reductions in the values of commercial properties done by the Cook County Board of Review that it shifted more burden not only onto Latino communities, but onto everyone.
And I do want to get into that, because in this study, that was one of the factors they mentioned. You went into office saying, we're going the other way. We're going to shift the burden more onto commercial so we can relieve the burden on residential. The Board of Review, you say, kind of reversed that back. Why did they do that?
Well, so what the Treasurer's report said is that the burden increased about, of that levy of $7.6 billion in Chicago, about 6.6% of that burden went on to homeowners after our reassessment. So our reassessment reduced homeowners' share of the burden, but because the Board of Review made such big cuts to commercial properties, it shifted so much of the burden back onto homeowners. So 6.6% of $7.6 billion is about $500 million, which was shifted onto each and every homeowner in Chicago. In Latino neighborhoods, that would have, like Pilsen, that would have translated into about $600 per home where their bills could have been lower.
This is from the Board of Review's decisions, which remind everybody, someone gets their assessment, they don't like it, they can go challenge it at your office, or the Board of Review, and the Board of Review in these cases ruled in favor of many of these commercial property owners.
So in the Treasurer's report, they called out the fact that these giant reductions on commercial properties shifted that burden onto homeowners all over the city, and more than half of that increase in neighborhoods like Pilsen are accounted for by that burden that was shifted back onto them.
The Treasurer's report also found another factor that your office assessed properties during COVID a little bit lower, even though values kept going up. Was that a factor here?
Well, what the Treasurer's report showed was that with the reassessment, homeowners after those COVID adjustments would have had a lower burden by about more than 5 percentage points. So the burden would have been lower under our reassessment by 5 percentage points on this levy of $7.6 billion. So that too would have been about $500 million less falling on homeowners. But what undid that was the 24% reduction in commercial properties on the biggest commercial properties by the Board of Review.
Okay, so again, that got reallocated. Because everyone, it's the same pie, it's the same size, and it just depends on who is going to get what portion of it.
Because a lot of homeowners out there, they're saying, I don't own commercial properties. How does this affect me? What people don't realize is that for every reduction in a big commercial
Someone
property,
else has to make it up.
It puts more of the burden on all of us, and we all have to pick up the tab, homeowners and small business.
Everyone has to pick up the tag on tax increment financing too, as you mentioned. So as we've talked about many tax increment financing, where these special accounts siphon some money from the taxing rolls, which means, again, it's the same pie. Someone's got to make up for it. How much did that cost taxpayers?
Well, the Treasurer's report said it increased the burdens on people in Chicago by about $130 million, which is about a quarter of the increase in the levy on homeowners in Chicago. So that's a dramatic increase. That's more than double the amount that's being debated on City Council about their levy. So these TIFs put a lot of burden onto homeowners because when increased value that would lower rates for everyone is trapped inside a TIF, that means everyone else has to, again, pick up the tab.
TIF's controversial for a long time, but again, they basically act as an added tax on every homeowner.
It's like a backdoor tax on everyone, and you have to hope that there's some benefit that offsets that.
All right, so in these neighborhoods near West Side like Pilsen, how can longtime homeowners there avoid being priced out, given what's happening?
Well, there's several things that can be done. First of all, the voters, in their wisdom, put in place a new board of review. Every board of review commissioner that was up for re-election was elected out of office. So there's a new board of review that can change their practices, and one of those new districts has a majority Latino representation. And so folks who are from neighborhoods that have been affected by some of the biggest increases, their new board of review commissioner can change this past practice, which put burdens onto them. Second of all, we think that we're going to be taking another look at these reductions that were done by the lame duck board of review, and the new board of review will have a chance to relook at these numbers, and that has a chance to take some of the burden off of these.
So they can undo what the old board of review did?
Well, we have put in place, basically we're going to have the new board review look at the values on these largest commercial properties, and they'll get a chance to do well by the homeowners. And third of all, folks who are running for mayor and for alderman can speak up and say that, hey, the city of Chicago can present its own evidence before the board of review to say, hey, some of these reductions are excessive and they're putting more of the burden on everyone else. So that's what the public can do. Average members of the public can make sure they're getting their exemptions.
The mayor's always had the power to go do that, and they've almost never done that. All right, Fritz Craigie, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Okay, thanks, Paris.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, we're one-on-one with the mayor of Robbins to discuss his first year in office while facing a water supply crisis. A new Alzheimer's drug may be approved early next year. Details about its potential benefits and risks. And from black holes to the origins of Western civilization, a new series highlights world-changing ideas that have come from Chicago. But first, some more of today's top stories. It's World AIDS Day today, and the Chicago Department of Public Health is releasing new data on HIV diagnoses. City health officials reveal new cases of HIV in Chicago residents rose by about 2% in 2021. That increase in new diagnoses bucks a decades-long trend of decreasing diagnoses in the city. Black Chicagoans represent a majority of new diagnoses, and CDPH reports 70% of clients served through the department's funded programs are Black and Latino. The Department of Homeland Security is issuing an advisory that the U.S. remains at a heightened terrorism threat level. This announcement follows recent attacks, including the massacre at the LGBTQ+ club in Colorado, the attack on Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, and an individual in New Jersey arrested for sharing an online manifesto that threatened attacks on synagogues. Targets of potential violence include faith-based institutions, the LGBTQ+ community, racial and religious minorities, government facilities and officials, critical infrastructure, and the media. DHS warns that several upcoming events could be exploited: the holiday season gatherings, large events, and the anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. A local economist who previously chaired the White House's Council of Economic Advisors under President Barack Obama lands another big job. Austin Goolsbee has been named the next president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. The 53-year-old is an economics professor at the University of Chicago. As head of a regional federal bank, Goolsbee will vote on the central bank's interest rate decisions next year. Goolsbee will take the helm in January, replacing the retiring Charles Evans. And finally, It's a double whammy of bad news for area drivers. The state's grace period to renew your driver's license, it's over. The pause was offered during the COVID pandemic, but ended today. Meanwhile, hundreds of drivers missed the news that Chicago's winter overnight parking ban is now in effect. The city towed 242 vehicles overnight on the first night, and that doesn't come cheap. Violators are hit with a minimum $150 towing fee, a $60 ticket, and a storage fee of $25 a day. The overnight ban will remain in effect through April 1st on Chicago's main streets between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. And now to Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day in South Suburban Robbins as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
Now, thanks, Brandis. We're now joined by the mayor of Robbins, Darren Bryrant, and trustee Tiffany Robinson. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for being out here in our town.
So I want to start off. We spent the day talking to residents, and one of their main concerns was obviously the water main breaks and the issues and how it impacts their daily lives. What sustainable solutions are you looking for?
Well, the first sustainable issue is to keep the water on, right? So whenever there's a water main break, we call Calumet City Plumbing to come out here and rectify the problem. The long-term solution is going to need some help from the Congress and from federal and the state help as far as a $40 million projected project that can completely revamp our water infrastructure, from the water tower to the water meters to the water pump. So it's a complete total project.
Now, we also heard concerns about the water bill rising.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? And, you know, it seems like a lot of people were confused and said that it's going to happen next year.
Yes, so currently we are in courts with the city of Chicago. We currently supposedly owe a $16 million water bill debt. In order to combat that debt, there's going to have to be a burden carried by our citizens with their water bills. That doesn't necessarily have anything directly with the water breaks, but the water breaks underneath ground is probably water loss that increases our debt to Chicago.
And Tiffany, is there anything that residents can do?
At this point in time, absolutely. I think that we should be contacting our state representatives as well as the state senators, members of Congress, to express their concern about the inadequacy of our infrastructure. You know, it's incomprehensible to even know and remember that on this Thanksgiving, we had residents that had no water. They could not shower, they could not flush their toilets, they could not cook their food, you know, and so we're calling on our citizens to help us call upon our state representatives, legislators, and members of Congress. Yeah. 435 members of Congress. We have 100 senators. We need everybody. This is bigger than just a Robbins issue. We need people outside of our local government at the state level, as the mayor already alluded to, and at the national level as well.
And Mayor, there is going to be a meeting with you and Bobby Rush soon. What do you hope to get out of that meeting?
A pathway to remedy, which it all comes down to money, right? So it's going to have to come down to where can we find the resources, whether it's grant money, whether it's a forgivable loan. But that meeting's on December the 14th, and I'm looking forward to having that.
And I have to ask, you are one of the youngest serving as mayor. I mean, how does that feel? You're 31 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an honorable task. It's a heavy lift, but you know, we have some strong leaders in place, including myself and the board of trustees that's going to turn this village around. So I'm honored to be able to lead this town in a time like this.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight, okay?
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez.
Thank you.
And coming up, we speak with the owner of the only dine-in restaurant in the village. But first, I send it back to you.
Wow, Joanna, looking forward to hearing that. Thank you so much. And now to Paris for a look at a new treatment for patients with Alzheimer's disease. Paris.
Brandis, a new drug to slow the effects of Alzheimer's has some promising results, but that comes at a significant potential cost. It's estimated that more than 6 million Americans over the age of 65 are suffering from the degenerative brain disease, and clinical breakthroughs to treat it have been rare. So has the research finally turned a corner? Joining us are Dr. Ian Grant, Assistant Professor of Neurology at Northwestern University School of Medicine, and Delia Gervier, Executive Director of the Illinois chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you both for joining us. Dr. Grant, I'll start with you. Pharmaceutical companies have conducted trials for this new drug, lecanemab. Tell us how this drug purports to attack Alzheimer's.
Yeah, so this is a drug that's an antibody that's directed against one of the proteins that's thought to cause Alzheimer's disease, a protein called amyloid. The idea is that these antibodies can attach to a particular form of amyloid and allow the body's immune system to then remove the amyloid from the brain. The thinking has been that if you could remove the amyloid from the brain, then potentially you could alter the course of the disease in the long run.
And Delia Gervier, how promising have the results of this study been?
We are so excited about the news and what is very promising for families who have been dealing with the journey of Alzheimer's disease. It's really great news. It's something that's bringing hope, and the possibility of seeing cognitive decline being reduced in a patient with Alzheimer's disease is extremely exciting.
And I should back up, Delia Gervier. Can you just tell us how much this study found that cognitive decline went down in the group that used the drug?
Yeah, they found that over 18 months, about 27% of the patients that were in the clinical trial for lecanemab, they saw cognitive decline in that many patients.
Dr. Ian Grant, what does that mean practically for folks suffering from Alzheimer's?
Yeah. So what Delia was referencing is a 27% reduction in decline. So, unfortunately, people didn't get better. It's not like this is a drug that does or was expected to make people go back to the way they were, but people declined at a slower rate. So compared to people who were getting placebo, the people who were getting the active drug didn't see as much deterioration in their cognitive abilities and ability to function in their daily lives.
And Delia Gervier, we mentioned at the top that this could come at a significant cost. There are side effects here, including brain swelling, brain bleeding. How serious are these side effects?
Like many other medications, there are some side effects to the medication in this case as well. However, the costs, we don't know what those costs are at this time, but we do know that in 15 plus years, this is the biggest news and the most positive thing that we've seen in terms of one more treatment available to patients suffering from this disease. And while there are some side effects, the good outweighs the bad at this time, and providing hope to families that are dealing with this journey is really a positive thing.
And given that, Dr. Ian Grant, the FDA has talked about accelerating approval of lecanemab. Is it risky at this point to give a full-on approval, given not much still is known about it and the side effects?
Well, I think that there are a lot of parallels between lecanemab and a previously approved drug, aducanumab, with one of the particular differences being that the lecanemab study was a full phase 3 study that was carried out to its completion. So the data that is known from the drug is more solid than the data that was generated from the earlier aducanumab studies. So given that aducanumab was approved on those grounds, it seems likely that lecanemab would also get approval for the same reason. Now, I think the other thing to consider too is what Delia was saying, in that this is a disease where there's really not much else out there makes a meaningful difference. And what constitutes a meaningful difference in a clinical sense is going to vary from patient to patient, but it seems to be moving the needle in the right direction.
And that's what I was going to ask you, Delia Gervier, given the fact that these two drugs that we're talking about seem to be the only ones that have clinically proven to have any impact. Is that it out there for folks and their families suffering from Alzheimer's in terms of treatments or therapies?
Currently, in the last year or so, we've had the results from those two drugs, but we also know that there are an additional 3 that we're expecting to hear additional information in the pipeline. And we expect readings from those additional treatments to come out within the next year or so. Now, we don't know what those results are going to be. But in addition to that, there are another 150 plus medications that are in clinical trials that are being looked at very closely. So what is exciting is that now that we are seeing much more funding going towards Alzheimer's research, we are now seeing the results from putting more money into funding because we know that without research, we can't find new treatments and we can't ultimately find a cure. So the fact that there are so many positive things that are coming out starting last year and now with lecanemab and then in the next year or so, we'll probably see some additional results from a couple more studies and then a few more in the future is exciting times. There's really lots of good positive news coming out for Alzheimer's patients.
Certainly a lot of promise, and it's good to take multiple bites at the apple.
Absolutely.
Because so many people do want to solve this. I have to bring up the issue of genetic testing because there's been a lot made of the actor Chris Hemsworth publicly announcing he was positive for the ApoE4 gene, which are traditional genetic markers for Alzheimer's risk. How reliable are these genetic tests, Dr. Grant?
Yeah, so the ApoE gene is something that's been a known risk factor for a while now, specifically what's called the ApoE4 form of the gene. Everybody carries 2 copies of this gene, and ApoE4 is a form that confers a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life. If you have 1 copy, it increases the risk a little bit. If you have 2 copies, it increases the risk quite a lot. Depending on what studies you look at, people might say that it's almost a certain thing. But it's important to keep in mind that these are just risk genes. So even if a person does some testing and find that they have 1 copy, it does not necessarily mean that they definitely will develop Alzheimer's disease when they get older.
And Mr. Hemsworth, we should mention, did test positive for both of those genes and then said he was going to retire from acting to spend time with his family because of the risk factors there. All right, fascinating conversation. Our thanks to Dr. Ian Grant and Delia Gervier. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis and a new video series from the University of Chicago. Brandis.
Paris, where do breakthrough discoveries and world-changing ideas come from? Well, turns out that at least some of them have come from here in Chicago. A new series of video shorts from the University of Chicago aims to highlight the role its researchers and scientists have played in transforming our understanding of the world and indeed the cosmos. The series is called The Day Tomorrow Began. Joining us now with more are Daniel Holtz, a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at the University of Chicago, and Paul Rand, the university's vice president for communications, whose team created the video series. Gentlemen, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Paul, let's start with you, please. The premise of the series is to help people understand the role that the University of Chicago has had in these groundbreaking discoveries. What prompted you to want to tell these stories?
Well, the university has almost 100 Nobels connected to it at this point, so there's quite a bit of history. But interestingly, it's a challenging time in higher ed because there's a lot of pressures in terms of political pressures, in terms of not totally understanding the value impact that's coming. Still, you find that almost 70% of a survey we did of Americans said they are looking to universities to really create the innovations and the breakthroughs that are going to make an impact in this world. We wanted to find a way to help tell that story in the best way possible.
Obviously, as you said, some almost 100 Nobel Prizes.
That's correct.
You Chicago researchers have obviously done some incredible work for quite some time.
That's right.
How do you decide which stories to parse out?
Well, the whole concept behind this, where the name came from, as you mentioned, is The Day Tomorrow Began. And it really was looking for those ideas that were those that, when they were discovered or created, changed the field or changed direction that was going to impact society in the biggest way possible. So we're going to hear a little bit about what happened with black holes, but we also have one coming out even next week on quantum technology, which is going to make a huge impact globally, but also here in the city of Chicago.
And also confusing for those of us who don't understand it, but we'll have to watch the film. You mentioned black holes because the first short film in the series focuses on the work of Chandra Subramanian Chandrasekhar and how his research paved the way for the discovery of black holes. Here's a little bit of that.
Discovering and understanding black holes would become the work of the greatest minds of the 20th century, one of whom was University of Chicago scientist Subramanian Chandrasekhar. At age 19, he calculated that some stars would violently collapse at the end of their lives. His idea was ridiculed by scientists at the time, but He was eventually proven right.
Just 19 years old at the time. Daniel, he proposed that stars were destined to collapse. Why was that such a controversial idea at the time?
Well, this was based on Einstein's theory of gravity, and that theory predicted that there'd be these things called black holes. And black holes are extremely radical. And so people thought, well, maybe the theory predicts that these could exist, but maybe they don't really exist. And that's, that's because nature doesn't actually make black holes. And what Chandra did was show that maybe nature does make black holes when stars collapse. And that was super radical. At the time, it's still super radical.
Explain how you and other researchers have built on this work.
So after Chandra and then, many years and a lot of work, now black holes are well established in the field. We have imaged black holes. We listen to the sounds of black holes colliding. Black holes are a major part of our story of physics. There's still lots of mysteries about black holes. They sort of play a central role, not only in basic physics, but also astrophysics. It's something we're just constantly thinking about and working on, especially now. The last decade has been extremely rich in black hole science.
Well, they also give us a great figure of speech when something is a black hole. So the second video short in the series, it is about the work of UChicago scholars at the Oriental Institute in changing our understanding of the roots of Western civilization. Here's a bit of that.
In 1919, Egyptologist James Henry Breasted of the University of Chicago embarked upon an epic journey across the Middle East and North Africa. There, he visited archaeological sites driven by a revolutionary idea that the roots of Western civilization were not in ancient Greece or Rome, as scholars previously thought, but in a region of the Middle East that he coined the Fertile Crescent.
Paul, I understand some folks suggest that he was the inspiration for Indiana Jones.
There's a good story behind all of that, so there's some strong belief that it came together through him.
So tell us a little bit more about this, about James Henry Breasted and what he did.
James Henry Breasted really was early on in helping define the field of archaeology. He had the idea for the Oriental Institute and went to John D. Rockefeller at the time and came up with this idea and said he had a big idea for really helping redefine where civilization began in this area. The film showed in the Fertile Crescent rather. And so he made incredible progress. And what was understood about archaeology when he was there and how they approach it today is very different, but the OI continues to build upon archaeology in some really quite remarkable ways.
You mentioned quantum science is the subject of
next week.
The one next week. What else can we expect going forward?
There'll be one about, actually, REM sleep was discovered at the University of Chicago, and so that'll be coming up soon. We have one, of course, there's going to be one in economics coming from the University of Chicago, so that's going to be in the mix. The first School of Social Work was created, and the professionalism of the field happened at the University of Chicago, so we'll be doing something on that as well. So really just, we have a series of 9 that are coming, but all of them are quite distinct in different ways, but they all come back to really reinforcing the impact, not only at the university, but how breakthroughs have really helped redefine society.
What do you hope people take away from these videos?
Thanks for the question. More than anything, number one is, of course, an appreciation for things coming out of the University of Chicago. Number two is that as we think about what's happening in higher education and the importance of research universities, that they understand how critical they are, especially we don't really have the Bell Labs of the world anymore, where transistors and other things came from. So much of this important work is coming out of universities, and we really, of course, want to keep that going.
Daniel, we've got just a few seconds left. Same question to you. What do you want people to take away from these videos?
Well, in this particular one about black holes is just how amazing black holes are and how we're still learning about them and, how they play such a crucial role in astrophysics cosmology and really why we're all here today. It's all related to the first stars and black holes.
Important work that all of them are doing, and of course with sharing the stories as well by the two of you. Thanks to you both for joining us, Daniel Holtz and Paul Rand. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
And up next, we check back in with Joanna Hernandez, who's reporting live from South Suburban Robbins. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Grooving along to some better temperatures. And now we check back in with Joanna Hernandez, who has spent the day in Robbins, Illinois as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
Paris, earlier today we visited Ding Kong. It's a restaurant that's been open for 5 months. We spoke with the owner, Kwame Blackman. He's a lifelong resident of Robbins. He says that his diner is only sit-down restaurant in the village and says he serves a mean pork chop. We started by asking him the vision for his place.
The vision was for like the community, for the community and stuff. That way we didn't have anything in the community for people to come and get fast food. So for the people that can't drive, can't afford Uber, they could walk across the street or come over.
So you were noticing that, hey, there's not a diner in the area anymore. There's no restaurants where people can sit down. You want to create that for the community.
Yes. That way you still can have the same vibe. If you went somewhere else in the other community, you come down there and sit, I'll meet you down there at Ding Kong.
And how was it when you first opened? You said it was pretty busy.
When it first opened, it was bananas. It was off the chain. It was like more like every order, like every 10 orders, it would be like 45 minutes. So the wait was like 45 minutes to an hour.
Wow. So how would you describe Robbins?
It's an up-and-coming community. We get new building houses, people building houses. We got a higher market of houses now. The village then changed a lot. We have own ambulance now, stuff like that.
So it seems like there's a big push to revitalize the area. Would you say that you want to be part of that? This is why you opened this place?
Well, I didn't know all that part was coming, but hey, it's a coincidence that I opened up at the right time. I'm going to enjoy it.
But you said also it's been hard for you. Tell me about that.
It's ups and downs with it, with the community and stuff. It's not I ain't gonna say that we like low economics around here. So it's ups and downs. You get some people every day, but I have my regulars. I have about 20, 30 people that's regulars. It's more of elder crowd. The elders love me.
So you're hopeful.
Yes.
Tell me about the name, Ding Kong.
But Ding is my nickname, and as I got big and got these muscles, that's when they started calling me Ding Kong. Or they call me a little silverback because I got the gray. So I just rolled with it, and it was kind of catchy, and it's been working.
So you really want people to come here and just feel like they're at home?
Yes, I have I guess you could say like a homely vibe from back in the day. So maybe that's why most of the elders come, because they can just come in, get their coffee, sit down, talk. The tradesmen, they come in and eat breakfast. They talk. Next thing you know, they did a business plan together.
So you're hoping the younger crowd also...
Yeah, if I get a little of the younger crowd, it'd be okay.
What do you want people to know who've never been to this part of town about the village?
About the village, it's up and rising. It's not like the past. It's a new beginning. You got a new mayor which is young. I think he's like 30. He turning 31.
Yeah.
Village trustees between 30 and 40 years old. And you have a couple of elders. So it's just new blood.
And this is a generational town. You said your parents lived here, their parents lived here.
Yes, my cousins stay here, uncles, everyone.
That's special.
Even a couple of some of my high school teachers from here too.
Again, that is Kwame Blackman. He tells us that he does everything from serving to cooking. Brandis and Paris, back to you.
Joanna, before we let you go, early in the program you talked about the water issue in Robbins tied to the old infrastructure there. This is a common issue across the south suburbs, is it not?
And Paris, as you heard from the mayor and the trustee, this is something that many of these south suburbs have to deal with. Now, we know that Representative Rush has secured $15 million in federal funding to update Dixmoor's water supply infrastructure. Now, Robbins is hoping for the same opportunity.
All right, such an important issue. Joanna, nice job down there today. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast in the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7 for the Weekend Review. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.